So the main two issues that I really wanted to deal with were the loading screen and the navigation of the enemies. With the loading screen, I figured that it was probably something with the navigation big taking precedence over the loading screen, even like being called first, even though it's written first. And what I basically tried to do with the main code of the game was taking it apart piece by piece to seeing what the code actually did, what parts worked, what parts didn't, what parts caused slowdowns, and what parts were fine. Needless to say, this caused some very weird and interesting scenarios. Okay, I figured something else out as well. Well, this is kind of a broken-esque type of version. So, as you can see, things tend to break with the textures because the walls are double-sided. Basically, every cell and its neighbor have to kind of agree on what exactly constitutes a wall. I basically removed that from happening, and this is what happens. So that's obviously needed. Okay, so I swear that the weird stuff that happens is more terrifying than this actual game so far. Uh, because and that's also terrifying. Uh, this just white box of. Oh, I realize what's happening. It's all so. I removed the code for actually like placing the doors places and also the walls as well, so they're all spawning at one spot and overlapping with each other, every one of them. So I'm just gonna do the sensible thing and jump off. And originally I thought it wasn't the navigation at all. I thought it was something with my code, specifically with the way that Unity does things. But no, it was still the navigation. I mean, this is the first time I'd actually gone into the navigation code itself and actually took a look at what was going on with that. And commenting out some of the stuff there, I realized it was actually that code that was slowing things down. But that's not the whole story, because there's more problems to be found here. If you change the number of doors, or actually the likelihood that doors will spawn in the maze to 0, and you save and you run the game, once it loads, no slowdown whatsoever. But if I change this back to 0.1, so basically a 1 in 10 chance, instant slowdown. I don't know why. It's weird. Weird behavior. Yeah, so as it turns out, the slowdown is because of the nav mesh surfaces after all. Because I had this line, not this line, but another line that basically told the game to draw the nav mesh for the cell, and it did that, but it also meant that it locked out the other processes from happening and basically made the game freeze. There's the function build NavMesh, which, as the title suggests, builds the NavMesh for any game object that has the NavMesh surface tag with it. But as you can see in the code highlighted here, it's basically being called for every single cell of the maze for every single maze in the game. Now, one of the funny things about NavMesh surfaces is that by default, they will bake everything. That is the default setting for NavMesh surfaces. When you call the bake function, it will bake everything regardless of whether it's part of the object or not. The baking function only really needs to be called once per, I think, any instance of the maze. No matter what, it will bake the entire thing. So instead of having 2 for loops, it's just 1. It's literally just 1, and you can see that it in a second you can see that it runs a lot better. So I mean, there's still that slight bit of slowdown, but it's still, I believe it's functional. But yeah, it's functional. It works. Actually, it's even better than I thought it would be, because you can see that it makes sure that the edges of the walls and the door are not accessible to the AI, because everything in this blue area is accessible, everything that is grayed out is not, which is exactly what I wanted to have happen. Okay, so I guess the most important part is to see actually if if the game actually compiles, first of all. And okay, I know what that's referring to. To see whether actually or not, whether or not even works with the enemies itself. So that should, I think that sounds good. That sounds like it's going. So where is our enemy? Hello, and you're moving towards me. And do you have a path? Show. I think it's moving towards me. I don't actually even know. But let's try it. Well, I can do this now too. That's interesting. That's kind of bad, but yeah, he's coming towards me. Neat. That's actually really interesting. I am glad that I'm able to do that now. But yeah, it does actually work. It does actually work well. It does make this more efficient. So that's awesome. That's really the whole point of why I'm doing this. Yeah, so I think legitimately only having to call the bake or the build nav mesh function once for everything is the way to go, because that's basically, I've even changed it to just have it iterate once and it goes very quickly. And I think so that's interesting because for a couple of reasons, because a, it means that once something changes in the game, I can just call that method and everything will change. B, it means that I don't have to even worry about multiple levels because it does everything all at once. Weird. I thought I had a C, but it's not actually. There's nothing there, so. Okay, to kind of wrap up things here, I've gotten this, which is a hell of a lot better than what I'm used to. And funny because now I was having the opposite problem of the nav mesh being built too quickly for the loading screen to actually show up. And so I had to basically tell it to wait until a certain amount of time to actually just show that everything was working properly, because you would start the game and then it would immediately just go, like immediately start. And that works pretty well in some cases. It doesn't work in every case, but it's something that I will have to figure out later. And you know what? I naively thought that I was done. Everything with the pathfinding was taken care of. I could just focus on some other small little features of the game, like having a trail behind the player so that they can actually know where they're going. Okay, so I'm going to go pretty fast with this just because there's a lot to talk about, and well, yeah, I'm trying to keep the overall thing as short as possible. So basically, one of the things I was noticing when I was playing through the game on my own is that you don't really interact with the enemies that much, and so I thought, oh yeah, there's definitely a way to control that. So this is basically what I did. It's basically looking at the average number of interactions that you have with an enemy, or average, sorry, I guess I can't spell, but it basically looks at every single time you the player has line of sight with an enemy, that counts as an interaction and they respawn and all that good stuff. But that is basically, if the overall interaction is less than the average, like the interaction average goal, then we put more pressure on the player by having enemies spawn on the current location or the current level that the player is on. Oh god, that was a lot of words. But it's a matter of balancing, because, and I will say it's down to I would argue three different issues. So there's this, there's also wherever it is, is it? I just saw it. Oh, I guess it's in the same. Oh, I'm dumb. Yeah. So this number right here is also something that needs to be controlled. That basically says how long do we have to wait before another enemy spawns, and then another third thing, right? So this number as well. This basically controls something else, which I'm not about to say, but it basically means well, actually, I guess I can say it. It's basically the variable that controls how long each update of the respawn time happens, which is great and fine. But the thing is that just kind of wanted to make that note of this because kind of getting the scheme of things for later on when they have everything done as well. But again, as has been the trend of this whole project, another problem with the pathfinding showed up. One of the other things that was causing slowdowns when I was originally trying to figure out what exactly was causing those slowdowns was doors. Doors suck because they are dynamic things that are built in an otherwise static environment. And so the thing about the navigation is that it does not like that whatsoever. So you would have enemies either walking through doors, being confused that there was a door that was closed, and basically going the shortest path to get to the player, because that's the logical thing to do under this circumstance with the algorithm that was used, which is not the thing I wanted it to do. Okay. So there is a fundamental problem with how, I guess. Sorry, let me start over. There's a fundamental problem with the way that Unity does pathfinding, at least for this application of what I am trying to do. And I can show you why. Is that it's different. Oh, that's changed. That should not change, but oh no, sorry, it's still the same. But basically, it doesn't recognize that the fact that the doors are closed. The doors are closed in this case, which it doesn't recognize that there is a adequate path. It doesn't know to go towards the doors rather than, so it goes up into this corner here, which is the closest distance to the player, but that doesn't make a difference because there is no physical way to get to the player. So I think it defaults to go to the shortest distance, which is a problem for this application specifically. And then the third thing was that everything was working fine except for the fact that they still refused to go through the doors even though they were open, which another thing that was also very bizarre. So 3 very different issues, and trying to find a solution to fix all 3 of them was, oh my god, what a nightmare that was. And basically, it took a lot of time this week to actually figure out and try different things to figure out what exactly was going wrong. So I think the code that I originally wanted to implement, which I never did, I thought I did, but apparently that was just all in my head, is this lovely method here, which is basically a way to get the maze to recognize the distance to the player, and I can show you what I mean by that. So the maze is basically made up of these cells, and so the distance from the player, the distance from the cell to the player in this case is 0 because the player is standing on that cell, because there is no distance that the needs to cover. The distance in the adjacent cells is 1 because you have to travel 1 cell to get to the player. And this is 2, this is 2, this is 3, if I can get to it, that's 2, but this is 3, and so on and so forth. I wish I could actually have a UI thing that shows the numbers, but I don't know how to do that. I'm not that good. However, this also didn't work well because of the aforementioned problem with the doors and the fact that they didn't allow the enemies to actually go through. And eventually, at a certain point, I was just ready to give up. But then again, I had spent way too much time on this week alone, as well as the time in general that I've spent in it to actually give up, so I tried with renewed determination to actually figure it out. And so one of the things about Unity in general is that the documentation is usually pretty good. But in this case, for this specific issue, it was a problem. Because everything, I think they have changed it over the years so that the documentation from a couple of years ago is completely different from what is true now. So basically trying to cross-reference all the different types of documentation from all the different versions was an insane, just absolute mess. But the saving grace of everything is YouTube. Because there are plenty of people that publish YouTube tutorials about how to do stuff in Unity. It's a great space, honestly, and I'm so thankful for it. I found this tutorial by the YouTube channel Brackies called Unity NavMesh tutorial making it dynamic. And I'm like, huh, that looks familiar. And I've actually watched the first parts of this video before. Literally, I think because when I was literally working on this, but I stopped for some reason and I click on the video, watch it, and I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense than what I was trying to do before. And so I basically implemented kind of playing around with what they said, and it's like, oh, suddenly now everything works fine. Oh boy. Oh yeah, so the whole thing about the doors and them being closed in the start is that the enemies can open them now. You are not. And that's basically the whole change to everything, and I'm thinking about how to do other things with that, but in the end I'm just grateful that the AIs are working fine, and oh my god.